That's why I talk more about hope. So I have shown you that, yes, there were hard times. I have shown you that there were constraints, but I have also made the case. The style of leadership. The leader matters, but it's not the president alone. The ministers, the corporate leaders. It matters. So I transition to the future. The hope and opportunity that I see. Why, in fact, it was not only the problems that drove me to come to Sierra Leone. Let me talk about the problems. I'll sit in United Nations meetings. Every statistics on advanced development, we're at the bottom. Highest maternal mortality rate even today. Today, over 60% youth unemployment. Yeah? Our debt is 2 billion for a country whose GDP for the year is about 3 billion. But we had debt forgiveness in 2005. How come we accumulated so much? For what? But this is the country with one of the largest deposits of iron ore, one of the largest deposits of titanium, diamonds, gold, 7 million people. But every statistic you look at us, highest infant mortality rate. I said, this is not right. So I've come home to help. But I know leadership matters. So I threw my hat in that I want to be president too. To bring knowledge back home. To bring hope and opportunity. In other words, for you, the businessmen and intellectuals, don't have an excuse and stay back. The interesting thing about politics, my people tell me, especially my best friends, some of them in Europe, America, I'm not going back. I'm not interested in politics. I say, okay, sit there. Politics go do you. Politics go do you. They will keep calling you to pay school fees. They will keep calling you to pay for hospital. And so on and so forth. Because poverty is deepening. But when there's conflict, your own relatives will become refugees. So, but there is hope. There's a lot of hope that Africa, we can do more. That's my belief, why I'm coming home. Because I believe we can transform, and I've seen it, that it is possible. Now, this is not working. Okay. You saw all of these messages back in 2011. Africa Rising, and if you look at the third lecture by Ngozi again, you'll see her talk about this. I'll not describe them. But suddenly, by 2011, there was this positive story about Africa, that we were rising. Everybody wanted to be part of this new literature, praising Africa. Yeah, you see all of them. All kinds of statistics about how we are growing. This is acting up, technician. It's going back and forth. The bottom line is, Africa did change. Africa did change. I give you some numbers, and you look at the projections for the future, for 2020, 2030, 2050. You see some good numbers. We will still be amongst the fastest growing economies as a region, not as individual countries. In fact, sub-Saharan Africa, or the economy almost doubled from 2000 to 2013 to about 2.7 trillion. From 2000 to 2013, the economy almost doubled to 2.7 trillion. Sub-Saharan Africa, in fact, is projected that by 2040, the economy could quadruple. It could. Remember, these are forecasts. There is rising income in the middle class. This is why you see all these shopping malls opening up now. Other people see opportunity. Some of us see problems. Because of this idea of the rising middle class, over 400 million, maybe 500 million people in the middle class, people are opening shopping centers. Here in Nigeria, I see a lot of them because they see opportunity. The rise of the African urban consumer. When I was here, Lagos Business School taught me about the Indomie story. We didn't think our children would stop eating gari, but they did. They continued eating the gari, but they started buying Indomie, and they minted money. So this urban consumerism we can capture, especially with the youth. There is the rising demand for food. Our population will be 1.3 billion by 2030, 2035, 2.2 billion by 2050. 2050 is not far, it's around the corner. Who is going to feed these people? We're going to add another billion of our brothers and sisters, because we also do something very well. Yeah. Who is going to feed them? Are we going to be begging for food? But we can feed them. For me, I see it as an opportunity. And of course, you've seen the digital revolution, what has happened with mobile phones. These are the numbers I just gave you. I talked about potential. Yeah. I gave you the potential to give you hope that indeed things, the future looks bright. Some say the future could be much better than even the present. But for me, because I'm heading towards the conclusions now, for me, these are the main challenges for competitiveness. But I also call it transitions. We have to go through these transitions. The number one is how we manage the demographic transition. We're going to add more young men and women. In fact, we'll have the youngest population across the world. All these are hungry young men and women ready to produce, ready to be productive. But how we harness it depends on, of course, education, skills formation, and what we do for our women. I say this why. When I used to go to Vietnam, doing lectures like this on industrialization, and I talk about population problems and the growing world population, the Vietnamese or the Indians will say, slow down, Dr. Yumkela. We don't see bigger population now as a problem. We see it as our demographic dividend. Can we harvest these young people? Imagine, 2050, 2.2 billion Africans, maybe 60% of them below 30. How will we use it? Will we fall in the Garden of Eden syndrome again? Treat it like any raw material. Because more young people is like new minerals. They're young. They're there to be plucked. But they're there to be nurtured, to be the factory workers for Africa, like the Vietnamese have done, the Cambodians have done. Why do I talk about women? In these countries, when I go to the textile mills, in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, most of the workers are women in the garment industry. But they are not alone. I've seen it in Botswana too. I've seen it in Lesotho in particular. In Lesotho at one point, they employed 36,000 people in the garment factories. Most of them were women. Most of them were women. I also visited a factory in Lesotho, set up by Philips to make energy efficient bulbs. 40% of the people being trained before the factory was built were women. So I asked the manager of Philips, why are you doing this? He said they're better with their hands and more careful. But they were making energy efficient bulbs because I was dealing with energy efficiency. That was the curiosity. So what we do with them, how we educate the women, empower them, Nigeria could be the next garment producer of the world. Because guess what? You have cotton too. The second one, we must directly support industrialization. President Obasanjo will say, young man, wake up. We told them this already in the Abuja Declaration back in '85, that Africa must industrialize. We talk about it, but we don't do it. Maybe partly because of the Garden of Eden syndrome. Every single African country that has discovered a new mineral in the last 20 years has not used it for industrialization. We've done the same thing everybody does. Everybody sits and waits for the export of that mineral to share the wealth. Not to invest in diversification as fast as we should. Industrialization, one prime minister in Asia told me, is never by accident. It is by choice. In the Asian countries, after we were told in Africa, under structural adjustment, that we should not have industrial policy, the Asian countries kept it. They had industrial policy, and in fact, in Europe and the United States, they've always had industrial policy. Because industrialization and economic transition takes long, 20, 30 years. So you must have a deliberate policy that will be there consistent for 20, 30 years for people to risk capital into industrialization. So policy consistency, having an industrial policy is crucial. Otherwise, and also one that links agriculture and industry. In Malaysia, I took Patotomi and some of your ministers to Malaysia back, it was 2001. President Obasanjo, you didn't know this because they took permission, the ministers, but I organized it. Kola Jamodo, right? Pauline Taleb, Minister of Industry, was Kola Jamodo. Pauline Talen was Minister for Science and Technology. You had just appointed Ikweme's daughter as private sector advisor. Patu Tome, the head of Manufacturers Association. I took them to Malaysia. It was not just about palm oil, but I used palm oil as the case study to send the message home about how you industrialize. I took them to every ministry that had impact and research centers that made Malaysia #1 in oil palm. And that year they announced what they call zero waste in palm oil. That's why the delegation went. President Obasanjo approved. And we went there. They showed us. They have a museum. They show you the time they came to Africa for the Jam Plaza. But then they show you what science did. They changed the Jam Plaza. They modified it. Then they will tell you how new management came into play to establish plantations. Not subsistence farming, industrial plantations. Then they show you research and development. They made 35 products out of one palm oil. 35. That's why they call it zero waste. The bark is used for, what we put on tabletops. The leaves, they were experimenting with support from Japan. How they can use the leaves, the protein in the leaves, to make ration for livestock production. Why? They were importing too much from the United States of corn. Can they substitute, and soybeans, can they substitute? Zero waste. But what happened? They borrowed something from Africa, applied science and technology, backed by research, good policy support from science and tech to industrial, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, to transform that product. We must, number 3, invest in energy and infrastructure. I will not even open that debate because that has been my life for 10 years. President Obasanjo knows. I have said Africa cannot industrialize without affordable, reliable energy. We can't irrigate our farms regularly to grow 3 crops instead of 1 if we cannot pump that water. We cannot have good sanitation if we cannot pump that water and purify it. So I don't need to make the case energy here, right here. And when I come here, I still get power interruption. After 20 years, I say we they look behind, we know they look forward. When I was here 2 weeks ago, and I was told there were queues still for petrol, I said this cannot be happening. I came here as a young minister back in '95 to beg Nigeria to send some oil for us, for our generators in Sierra Leone. That time they told me, you crazy, you don't see we queues? Why are we still having queues if we have four refineries? Why? Let us be frank. Shouldn't happen. You can rotate repairs, but the same problems seem to stick here. They stay. They stay. They don't move. So energy and infrastructure, I don't need how you get that to make competitiveness of the economy, reduce the cost of doing business. We have to accelerate interregional trade. That you know already. We trade with ourselves. The Asians do it a lot. In fact, I know in Asia, 50 or 60% of the investments in the region come from the region. We can do that too. How the leadership will recognize these and push it, whether part you want to call them values, I call it all transitions. How we manage those transitions. But we must build climate resilience. I have spent good 10 years of my time in the UN dealing with energy and climate change. The reality is the following. We account for less than 3% of greenhouse gas emissions. But all the projections of the worst impact will be here in Africa. So if somebody else is doing something that will make us be bad and suffer, don't we want to act? So those who debate whether climate change is real or not in Africa, we feel it. We get rains in Sierra Leone in December now. We were not used to, which is affecting our cropping cycle. But climate resilience, also the roads. You build a road, if it is not climate resilient, the first storm, 10 years of investment washes away. You have to start all over again. So climate resilience matters. How we manage that. Next slide. The same slide. And then I'll go to the very last one. The same slide, please. Yeah. The last one, enhance good governance and move to the developmental state. Give me the next slide. I've talked about governance, but why the developmental state? No. Move again. Move again. Yeah. Back. The developmental state. These are the characteristics of states in Asia, but also in Europe and Latin America. what the leadership did to ensure that their governance structure was about development, the developmental state. They made sure they promoted economic development by explicitly favoring certain sectors. It is not by accident. If Nigeria wants to be the largest gas producer in the world, Nigeria has to invest in it. It will not happen by accident. Number two, they commanded competent bureaucracy. They tell you the stories of France. Some of the most educated people who later on became presidents and mayors were trained in special schools. Special schools. In Asia, in Japan, they tell you about their bureaucrats. And I have met them. They're among some of the best. And you see that in America and elsewhere as well. So yes, our civil service, because they're always there, they tell the minister what to take to parliament, for God's sake. Those bureaucracies have to be efficient. That's what the others did. Placing robust, competent public institutions at the center of development. Those institutions include universities, research centers. As I say, common sense has a limit. Common sense cannot build an aeroplane or a computer. So you need good academic institutions, good research centers to back public policy. When we elect leaders who don't understand the complexity of development and do not value research and evidence-based policy, we will be in trouble. Clearly articulating social and economic goals and deriving political legitimacy from their record of development. Leaders should be praised for their development record, not how much they're smart enough to hold on to power. The last slide and I'll go. How does all of this apply to Nigeria? Now I want you to be angry with me. I first used this, I think it was when the UK was doing the Olympics. Nigeria organized an investment forum at the Royal Dorchester. They asked me to be one of the keynotes. So I sat with a Nigerian niece of mine, and we were talking, and I was explaining what I think of Nigeria. She said, "Uncle, let me draw something for you." We lost it, so last night my daughter, who is married to a Nigerian, is in the room. We sat together last night. Put it up. I said, this is how I see Nigeria. Putting all of this together. Your next set of leaders should want to do this. I call it the Nigerian triangle. You must have infrastructure that connects Kano to Lagos. What do I mean? Rail. Rail that can carry cargo. You must have it that way. So the yellow lines are where your rail links are. Kano, Lagos, Port Harcourt, Calabar, back to Kano. You do the same homework at home. Use your computer. That rail from Calabar to Kano cuts across Benue, your bread basket. I used to go there. You see the circles? Those are your growth poles. Pat will say, yes, Kande, the theory of growth poles. If these areas develop, they lift the rest of Nigeria. But you see in the middle, I put a green line. You can connect that to Makurdi straight to Lagos. You're connecting your population centers by infrastructure to resource centers. But you can also specialize. Your southern region should be your energy and petrochemical hub. I'm not talking about the usual debates. Invest, you make a decision that the next 50 billion or 100 billion you make over the next 5 years, you will transform the South to be your power engine of Nigeria. I lived in Austria. They were buying energy from their neighbors. We have to trade in energy. But yes, you can do more for fertilizer. You can do more for all kinds of downstream petrochemicals. With this kind of infrastructure, you follow the same yellow lines with your gas pipelines. You can do the same with telecoms. In that middle, all of those areas rise, and it is not new. If you go to South Korea, they will tell you General Park. General Park did the same thing 40 years ago. One highway became now today what they call the industrialization diamond. Because that one man had vision to do that linkage, everything else has been built around it. There are ship-making companies, there are steel works, there are microprocessors all around the diamond. You have your own diamond. And I emphasize this because one of the things that bothered me in Nigeria, we come with a good idea. I came back from Malaysia with the idea of the Small and Medium Industry Development Authority. I showed them that in Malaysia it was very small not more than 50 employees. So the money that government gave them went to support SMEs and industries. When we finished designing it in Nigeria, every local government said they wanted an office. Those who were working with me to design it quickly went to Senate and decided they wanted a big building and 20 motor cars already. So what did we create? A bureaucracy, not an effective institution to in fact support the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. I hope I provoked you enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President of Sierra Leone, to come. That's a hug by presidents. You may please take your seats, sir. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kande Yumkela. As some of us may have observed, the brochures just came in, and because of that, we missed the opportunity to properly introduce Mr. Yumkela. His profile is on page 18. You can get to know more about him on page 18. Let me quickly take this moment to recognize a few persons before I invite the next speaker. We have His Royal Highness,